This episode is brought to you by PropelOff. People take authentication for granted, but it's more than how customers log into your product. It's how you manage your relationship with your users. The easiest way to make authentication your advantage is to use PropelOff. PropelOff is more than just functional. It's powerful. With tools like Managed UIs, Enterprise SSO, robust user management features, and actionable insights, PropelOff adapts as your product grows. And the best part? When off is effortless, your team can focus on scaling, not troubleshooting. That means more releases, happier customers, and more growth for your business. Save dev time, win over your customers, and propel your business forward with PropelOff. Check them out at propeloff.com. That's PROPELAUTH.com. This episode is brought to you by Paddle. Don't settle for less when you can have more, MOR, with Paddle, your merchant of record. Eliminate the headaches of payments, grow your revenue everywhere, and focus on what you do best, building your product. Get more revenue with less hassle at paddle.com. This episode is sponsored by Code Crafters. As an engineer myself, I know that the best way to learn how to code is to build something new. But sometimes it's hard to come up with project ideas as well as find a community of folks on the same learning path. That's where Code Crafters comes in. With Code Crafters, you can build something that actually stimulates your mind while strengthening your engineering fundamentals. And you can do so by using your favorite IDE or tools to code and build your own Git, Redis, or HTTP server in the language of your choice. Languages like Rust, C++, or Go. Code Crafters is designed to optimize your learning experience as it's designed for productivity. Sign up today and become a better, more confident programmer. Visit codestory.co/codecrafters. That's CODECRAFTERS to get started and get 40% off your upgrade. Okay guys, I got a serious update for you. You heard me talk about SEMA and the product roadmap radar. I just caught up with Matt, who's the founder there, and he gave me the latest on what they are building. And my mind is blown. The team at SEMA are taking things to the next level. Built around the core of the product roadmap radar, i.e. code and Jira analysis, they are building agent orchestration across the product lifecycle. Picture this. You hook up this system same as before, i.e. integrate your repository and your backlog, Jira today. From that point, SEMA's agent analyzes the codebase and makes suggestions as to what needs to be done next and what could improve, optimize the product. Then, if those tasks are routine, the agent assigns the task to a coding agent, think something like Devin, to complete the minutia, while assigning the human-in-the-loop task to engineers themselves. What you end up with is engineers focusing on building core competency features while AI handles all the rest. If you're not salivating right now, I don't think you fully understand what this means. But here's what I would suggest. Right now, their product is in a closed beta, and SEMA is looking for folks to sign up for their Product Intelligence Advisory Board. This gives you the opportunity to use the product, give feedback, help shape the future of what's built. Oh, and not to mention additional free usage of the product potentially through the end of 2026. So, if that fits your workflow and toolset, you need to reach out today. Go to codestory.co/nextlevel, NEXTLEVEL, and reach out to Matt at SEMA to learn more and join the Product Intelligence Advisory Board. Again, that's codestory.co/nextlevel. This episode is sponsored by Postman. Postman is the world's leading API platform, trusted by 98% of the Fortune 500 and over 40 million developers. Tap into APIs from 18,000 plus companies to power agents that make smarter decisions. Learn more at postman.com/podcast/codestory. This message is sponsored by Melee Search. Today, search isn't just a feature, it's a cornerstone. And Melee Search gives your users the experience they need with lightning-fast performance, full-text search, AI usage, and multimodal capabilities. Melee Search delivers relevant results in less than the blink of an eye. Use the promo code CODESTORY at checkout to get 2 months free at meleesearch.com. That's MEILI search.com. Hello, listeners. Today we are talking with Oliver Mitchell, partner at FF Venture Capital, the most engaged technology venture capital firm in New York City since 2008. They have created billions of dollars in market cap value. And recently, Oliver released a book titled A Startup Field Guide in the Age of Robots and AI. In the book, he sets the stage to mentor and provide mentors around building a hardware startup in modern-day times. The book is full of advice, real-life stories from the trenches, and practical information to help you succeed. Make sure you check out the show notes for a link to purchase the book on Amazon, or go to codestory.co/fieldguide. Well, Oliver, thank you for being on the show today. Thanks for being on Code Story.
Thank you, Noah. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Really excited to dive into your book, A Startup Field Guide in the Age of Robots and AI. Really excited to dive into the content there and to learn more about FF Venture Capital. But before we do, tell me and my audience a little bit about you.
A longtime founder, operator. I've built companies. I've sold them to big multinational organizations like American Express and ADT, which later became part of Johnson Controls. And after my last startup, which was in the STEM robotics space, I started to take a deep dive into the industrial automation space. I did that in one of two ways. The first way, I would meet with founders and I would understand a little bit about what they're doing, and I give them a little bit of capital, and I built up my own investment vehicle called Autonomy Ventures. And within a period of 6 years, I was fortunate to have 8 exits, 3 that were fairly substantial: Novacure, Exobionics, and Triple-Lift. And the second way that I interface within the industry, I would write a lot of articles about my experiences with these founders. And I was really the first one starting in 2011 to talk about the business of robotics. Everyone would speak about the technology, the servos, the actuation, the end effectors. And I was like, what's the value proposition? How is this going to get high usability, reliability, and payback for end users? And I struck a nerve with the industry. I'd get invited to speak at trade shows like CES and South by Southwest, and my articles would get syndicated out there. And this summer, I took all that knowledge, all those net contacts, and I wrote a book, which also features some of my more audacious articles of founders doing amazing things, called A Startup Field Guide in the Age of Robots and AI.
Very cool. Very impressive track record. You're obviously done some amazing things, and can't wait to dive in the book here in a little bit again. But before we do, tell me a little bit about FF Venture Capital, where you are now.
After Autonomy Ventures, I started to work with some friends, John Frankel and Alex Katz, in really opening up the deep tech portfolio for them. And we have investments in Plus One Robotics, which is in the logistics space, Mana, which is in the drone delivery space. I sit on the board of Civ Robotics, which is in construction tech automation, Cambrian Robotics, which is in smart manufacturing. And really, I've been there for quite some time. We just finished investing out of our 6 funds, and we have a great portfolio of about 65 plus active portfolio companies. We've been around since 2008, about 300 million under management today, and have a number of companies that are unicorn status, worth more than $1 billion in the private markets.
Fantastic. Obviously, a great track record there as well. Okay, so then let's dive into the book, Oliver. So tell me about what the goal was. The book is titled A Startup Field Guide in the Age of Robots and AI. What was the main goal of you writing this, and what were you trying to accomplish?
The main goal was to help founders, especially working in mechatronics, in taking their nascent ideas, the kernel, if you would, and helping them develop that into a company all the way to going public. I started to interview about 30 leaders in the industry, luminaries that I look up to, like Mick Mounts, who developed Kiva Systems. It got bought by Amazon for $775 million. iRobot, the first consumer product company within the robotic space that launched the Roomba and went public and was a multi-billion-dollar company in the space and still is, and others. It's a field guide because, as I say in the intro, I used to be an avid backpacker. Being that I have a family now, it's a little bit more difficult. And before going out into the wilderness, you really need to know what you're going to get yourself into. You're going to know what provisions to pack, what clothing to bring, what trail to take. And too often, founders have not really done enough customer discovery, have not really thought through every aspect. And there's so much external factors out there that they end up getting feedback from various people within the industry, whether they're pitching a new investor and they say you should do this, and they update the PowerPoint this way. They speak to a channel partner. They're like, if you only could do this, and then they change their product strategy. And they don't really have clear convictions on how to achieve product market fit. And if only they would have done more customer discovery, create greater feedback loops, realize what are the steps to go in along this journey to avoid the pitfalls out there, learning from experts in the space of what they experienced, they would be better suited to take their company from napkin drawing to IPO.
That's a fantastic goal and something that is quite an accomplishment of looking through the book and seeing all the information and the luminaries that you brought forth into the book. Obviously, this is incredibly helpful for people that are, as you mentioned, going out into the wilderness, right? So they know what they're getting into. In particular, in the book, you discuss what it takes to launch a business in this particular industry. What are the 5 essential rules for launching a successful automation company?
So a robot, first off, needs high utilization. I don't know how many times I've seen pitches. We built this robot of superhuman strength and it's going to pick up 2 tons, but you only need to pick up those 2 tons once a week. So what is it doing the other hours of the week? And if it's not being utilized, it's not going to be adopted within industry or within the enterprise. I don't know how many times I've visited a convention center and I've seen in the corner a telepresence robot. That used to be a big hot thing. These robots that would allow people to stay home and it would navigate the conference for them. Beam was a big provider there. Cisco was a big provider there. But it was maybe used 1 hour a day, if that. Then 23 hours, it's collecting dust. And so you need a robot that is working at high speed, that's really getting a high utilization. It also needs high efficacy. Civ Robotics, the company I sit on the board of, is 10 times faster than a human surveyor, half the cost, and greater accuracy. And that's really key of robotics. So you need high reliability there. That's rule number 2. Because when things go down in industry, it can lead to something catastrophic. People can get injured, loss of limb or life. People are in software are very used to those blue screens, those DOS blue screens, and to reboot. People in industry have very little patience for a robot failing. Think about it. If you're in a Waymo autonomous vehicle and it crashes, you have no one to blame. And so you have very little patience and it's going to shut down the whole autonomous driving program within that city. And it has. Payback. A robot, as I said in the Civ Robotics example, can't cost more than what you're currently paying. It can't be 5-year payback. It has to be a reasonable payback that works with an industry standard. And you need high utilization, high reliability, and high payback. The other things, is IP. It has to be really differentiated. It can't just be a prompt engine built upon OpenAI. It really has to be something unique out there that's not just a hack. And then you really need to target customers where there's going to be a high level of adoption. And so I'll give you an example of a company that really did this, and I mentioned them earlier, and led the way. And it's still one of the bigger robotics transactions out there, which was Kiva Systems. Now, Kiva Systems came out of Webvan. Webvan was a high-flying .com company that went public at $800 million. Back then, it was a very big IPO during the .com boom. And it was the first company to promise grocery store deliveries from online. Predates Instacart, DoorDash by over a decade. But it did 2 things unsuccessfully. One, it's customer discovery, which Steve Blank, someone I look up to within this world of startup literature. He teaches a course at Stanford, goes through it and it deconstructs Webvan. And I quote from Steve Blank and use one of his charts in my book. And that they really spoke to maybe 10,000 users out there while raising $800 million. They didn't really do enough customer discovery to find out what people really wanted from online grocery. What did they really need? It sounded great, and they did great commercials, but it left people unfulfilled. Number 2 is, as Mick Mount said, who was then the director of fulfillment, who was an engineer at Webvan. He said they were basically taping $20 bills to every package that went out. Because if you think about it, Webvan was the first one to open up that carton. Typically, if you had a carton of tomato sauce, you delivered a full carton to your grocery store, Kruger's or Albertsons. And you had somebody like a rack jobber who would come in and open up that carton and put it on the shelf. But at Webvan, they just shipped 1 jar of tomato sauce and 1 jar of fettuccine pasta box. So they had to open up the carton. They had to send it across the fulfillment center, and there was really nothing well suited. And so they took stuff, very expensive equipment, and Mick tells in the book, he would interview them and say, listen, we have this chute. Can I put a jar of tomato sauce, of ragu tomato sauce down the chute? And the guy would be like, no, because when it would hit the bottom of the chute, the glass would break and you'd have tomato sauce all over the gearing. And then he'd say, I have this bag of rice. Can the conveyor belt pick it up and put it over here and put it in the box? No, a bag of rice. We don't have a gripper that can grip anything that soft. And so they didn't really have anything. They built out these fulfillment centers without figuring out what they needed. And they just went into the business and it cost them so much money. They were losing on every package that was going out and they didn't have enough customers to support this. And they were eventually deleveraged and they eventually had a file for bankruptcy. And so when Mick, after Webvan, was starting to think about fulfillment, and he knew that online fulfillment was really going to be a very big thing as e-commerce was just exploding in the early 2000s. He said, what technology do I need? He didn't say, I want to build a robot company. He said, what technology is going to solve this problem that I experience every day at Webvan? And he thought of a robot that would deliver the shelving to the picker and would take off that shelving of ragu tomato sauce and that pasta and then put it in the box. Back then, someone would have to walk like 3 miles to get a box off a shelf in a distribution center. And in fact, Amazon used to have people on roller skates before they saw that was a bad idea and led to high workers' comp claims to shorten the time. And so bringing the shelving to the picker could stay at a station. And actually those shelves, as Rafael Andrea says in the book, used to organize themselves based upon the online database of the best sellers. And so the best sellers were on the perimeter and the less selling items, the dogs, were in the interior. And so everything was moving very efficiently. And this was a very successful strategy. And he ended up serving, before selling to Amazon, the top 10% of all e-commerce companies, including Zappos and diapers.com, which got acquired by Amazon. And when they saw it firsthand, they actually bought it for $775 million, paid for itself. With that year, they shipped $2 billion worth of packages. The first thing that they asked Mick to do was fire all their customers so it could be something exclusive for Amazon.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, so there's obviously a lot that you've dug into. You've lived and experienced this. You've talked to these luminaries and really surfaced the things that are important here. And it's a lot, right? It's hard to do one of these types of businesses to do a startup in this space. And as we all know, in the startup world, or when you're trying to grow a startup or even start anything, you're trying to attract investors. And I think there's a visceral reaction to hardware sensors and robots that you mentioned. How do you attract those investors? And how do you prepare, circumvent, or even comfort these investors when they spot the red flags?
Absolutely. And that's why I wrote the book. The world of investors for software and now AI is huge. The world of hardware investors is still a small community. And so your funnel gets pretty small. And so you really have to differentiate yourself there. But at the same time, people and funds, especially financially driven funds, need to get a return. And they don't want to invest in something that is seemingly capital intensive. And so you really need to almost have software-like margins and huge opportunities. And we're seeing something interesting in robotics with humanoids now as well, because humanoids cost a lot of money. Before I get into that, let me just take a step back. It's really important for a startup to realize that not every investor is the same. FF has a very different thesis than, Eclipse, Leora Susan's fund, who I interview in my book, or AliCorp. I interview A. Murray in the book. And you have to understand that every fund operates differently. And maybe venture capital is not who you want to target. Maybe you want to target corporate venture. But a corporate venture firm operates very differently. They're not about financially driven returns. They're about strategic returns. I interview Sean Simpson in the book, who was at GM Ventures. He's now at New Lab Ventures in Detroit. And it didn't matter how wildly successful that startup is, it would not even make a dent into the balance sheet of GM. And so you have to realize that the success for GM is the integration into their core business, into their cars, into their fleet management systems, into their manufacturing processes. And so you have to align your interests with a corporate venture to their interests. And then obviously there's government. Defense tech innovation right now is huge. DIU, Defense Innovation, has a huge budget to deploy out of. And we're seeing how the impact of drones in modern warfare and protecting the warfighter, making him or her more efficient in combat situations. You're seeing government at all facets with SBIR grants and other grants, whether DARPA or NIH. And so you have to really think through, how am I going to navigate this system? And the first way to realize is that it's not a homogeneous money pit that every person that you're going to attract is going to be motivated by the same thing. And you really have to do your recon to figure out which are the best types of investors for your business. And once you do that and figure out their theses and what they've invested in, you're better equipped to attract. And that at the early stage, it's primarily driven by three things. People, first and foremost. The early stage is very simple. If the founders of the startup are not people that you think are going to build $1 billion business, it doesn't matter how smart you think they are, you're not going to invest in them. It'd be foolish to invest in them. If they're arrogant, if they're not coachable, if they don't hustle, if they don't have high integrity, it'd be a foolish investment. And so the founders really have to be highly capable, highly motivated, and really the right jockey, not the right horse. And then it's product. Is this product differentiated in the marketplace? Is this product achieving product market fit, a high value proposition that people are going to pay money? And that's really where you have to do your customer discovery. You got to speak to 500 potential customers out there, create great feedback loops, and not just to speak to your friends and family, but really speak to people and ask them the most important question. How much will you pay for this? And if they say, well, I said I like it. I never said I was going to buy it. And I had a company like that, Civ Robotics, which is amazingly successful. They were just featured on CNBC in solar construction. They originally started off with a drone company. And they went to people and they're like, people said, oh, we love drones. We love drones. And they built this amazing drone that did autonomous staking on the construction site. And people were like, wow, that's really great. And he's okay, how many are you going to buy? They're like, oh, we said we love drones. We never said we're going to buy drones. And they ended up pivoting. And by no means is a pivot a failure. A pivot is just part of the life cycle of a startup. And they pivot to a terrestrial robot and they hit their stride. And so the product really has to achieve that fit. And if it doesn't, you got to iterate more and create those feedback loops. So you iterate at the right time and don't spend money foolishly. And it has to be well differentiated within a very competitive landscape. The last thing is the plan. You need a sales plan to go out there and to have the right business model. You can't just do it based upon what investors are saying. Investors are going to say, we want a robot as a service. We want this to look like a SaaS company. But then you go out to manufacturing, they're like, we don't purchase like that. We don't want you to have the CapEx. We want us to have the CapEx. We purchase through integrators. It might work in logistics. It might not work in manufacturing. You have to make your business model work to your industry, and you have to really scale up with the right channel partners, the right direct sales team to be successful there. And with all that said, you hopefully build a cap table of investors that can help you get there faster and can provide you the right support. I think venture capital can provide a lot of support. And you really want partners who are going to be with you, not just for that round, but have the network to help you through consecutive rounds. And we're seeing that I'm an advisor to Persona AI. Persona raised a very large pre-seed round. They're in the humanoid robotics space. I interviewed Nick Radford, who ran Robonaut 2, and Valkyrie, the humanoid robotics lab for NASA. He launched a robot to space, to the ISS. And now Persona AI is going after the hard jobs that are just too dangerous for humans. And they have a contract with Hyundai for shipbuilding out there. And so they have the right partners, the right investors. They're able to, this is a very capital intensive industry, humanoids. But what you're seeing is the opportunity through AI, the opportunity through great dexterous systems can make that pay back in a very meaningful way, because for every job, there's a humanoid potentially could fulfill.
So you mentioned in your answer there about product market fit being an important piece of this. And like most startups, probably more in particular with hardware, you got to have the right people or R&D or just to get the MVP out. What are some of the strategies to validate product market fit in these specific hardware startups?
It's what I said. It's customer discovery. It's speaking very early on. I think is getting out of the building, as Steve Blank would say, or getting out of the lab and really getting out in front of customers early on and creating those feedback loops really early on. And figuring out who is the decision maker, who is the ultimate customer, and to finding out what they would pay for it. And if they would say, you know what, it's the right chapter, wrong page, it needs to do this and this, then you go back to the drawing board and you iterate. Because too often, like in the example of Webvan and others out there, you'll go out to market with something that you think the market needs. And then customers say, no, that's not what we need. We need this. And that only if you did your customer discovery and create those feedback loops early on. An example for my portfolio is Burrow, who I interview, working in agriculture. He grew up on a family farm, and there's lots of automation in wheat and corn and big field agriculture, but in berry picking and orchards, very little. And there's a lot and he originally wanted to go out with a harvester, but he realized that harvesting was really complicated and really slow. And what people were saying, what they needed is we need a collection point. We need our orchard or our vineyard to work like an Amazon fulfillment center, like those Kiva systems. And so we need a mobile robot where we could put bins of berries or grapes or almonds, and that could go up and down the rows that pickers can put the full bins in, and we could get an empty bin, and creating those stations there. And that is what really made Burro very successful. And they're expanding internationally. And they just launched Burro Grand. Burro means donkey in Spanish. And so Burro is now working in nurseries and pulling lots of trees and plants. We're talking hundreds around nurseries now in their new area and their new products.
Oliver, so, one thing we haven't touched on yet is the government, right? You mentioned that there can be useful partnerships with the government, and at times the government can create roadblocks through overregulation, things like that, slow pace of play. How can these partnerships be used as funding or even potentially customer acquisition channels?
Government can be a great partner. Obviously, Palantir is a great example of that. You have to ask yourself who in the government could be helpful and realize what is the business that you're in first. For example, if you're in manufacturing and you're like, wait, this could have an application for military bases, that's a different, sales strategy. And it takes different people to sell into that. And I think that too often with government, that people get attracted to the grant network. And the SBIR grants are fantastic. The small business grants provide a great opportunity for startups. And the purpose of them is to fund technology that is just not ready for private cap. But there are many people that just go through loops of getting DARPA grants and SBIR grants and other grants and do all these pilots. And it's the same thing in the commercial sector where people will do pilots with big corporations, with their innovation departments, but it's completely divorced from an actual business unit. Really, actually, they're in pilot purgatory, if you would, because they never make that crossover to actually getting a purchase order from that organization, whether in automotive or in logistics or in medical, and that in government as well, that you'll have DARPA grants or AFWorks, but you're not actually working with a military unit that has purchasing decision-making. And one of the things that has happened this year with drones is they reclassified drones that they are no longer a special purchase and that actually units can purchase their own drones and that they are a critical and essential feature or essential piece of equipment for the modern warfare fighter. And so enabling purchasing decision-making by individual units. And so you need to get into those units from the defense side, or you need to get not to the Department of Energy, but the actual customers that the Department of Energy interfaces with, if that's your marketplace. And so I think government can be very additive, but like the commercial sector, you really have to tie what you're doing to the KPIs of the end users and really go through what are the key performance indicators for me to turn this pilot contract into actually a revenue driving contract. Just one last thing, government records revenue very differently than the commercial sector, which does on a GAAP accounting accrual basis. Government's much more on a cash-driven contract basis.
That makes sense. I appreciate you walking through that. We've touched on this already at a high level, but you've interviewed some of the most respected luminaries in the space. I'm curious about maybe the one that you feel is most impactful to you, or maybe the most impactful one for the audience. Maybe the real-world case study that aligns with all the points you're making in the book, and what was their significant challenges that this luminary overcame?
I don't have a favorite child. I think the way the book is organized is the most impactful for the stage of development is how I made that marriage work. Mick Mounts' story for Kiva is a great example. Ryan's story at ClearPath and their sale to Rockwell Automation is a great example of an exit opportunity. iRobot's transition from being a professional services company to being a consumer-driven company and their IPO are great examples in each one of those stages. Nick Radford, who was at NASA, who ran the humanoid robotics lab, is a great expert on government relations. And now he's building a new humanoid robotics company, Persona AI. So I think that each of the people that I interview provide a great window to the audience at each of the stages of development. And they're working in different industries. Tommy Shuren, who's at Civ, is working in solar. Andrea Thomas at Diligent Robotics is working in healthcare. So there's not really a crossover. And so if you want exposure to a variety of different industries, it really provides a great stepping stone for you to build off of their experiences.
Absolutely. I appreciate that and can understand not having a favorite child and how much value can come from each one of these stories. For the audience, you've gone through, this in many different angles. You've written a book, you're a leader at FF Ventures. You have lived all this out. What's one piece of advice you'd give someone heading down this path? They want to do their own startup. They want to do a hardware startup, maybe even robotics. What would it be? What's the piece of advice you'd give them?
I would say listen to the industry. Don't just talk to yourself. I think that too often founders get into a loop and are just talking to themselves and self-validating, but don't really get out there and really listen to the industry. And I think that helps at every stage of your development, from the idea stage all the way to scaling up to the liquidity event, to that big exit opportunity. And that's why when I authored a book, it wasn't about Oliver Mitchell. It was about the people I was interviewing, because I really want to listen to experts in this space and I want to deliver their knowledge, their stories to the reader, and to help them, to guide them, because it's a field guide, on their own journey. And I think if you listen to your customers, you listen to your employees, you listen to your partners, you listen to your capital partners who are funding, you listen to the industry and your competitors, and you will be much smarter. Now, it's not saying that every piece of advice is something that you should take. You want to definitely create a sieve and be able to organize it in a thoughtful manner and have your own convictions. But that, I think, is developed by greater experience. And that happens first and foremost by listening.
I love that advice. I think that's fantastic. Well, Oliver, thanks for being on the show today. Your book really highlights a lot of interesting points and really key factors into the success of a hardware startup or robotics startup. Obviously, you've lived this world. You have seen this world. You've interviewed the luminaries. And this is a really interesting look into the startup world of something that we don't dive into often in this show, which is the hardware side of things. So I really appreciate you illuminating this path for us.
My pleasure. And thank you, Noah, for putting together this podcast, which is extremely informative. I loved looking through past episodes, and I appreciate your time today.
Oliver brings to light key requirements for starting a hardware business in this day and age, not only from his experience, but from the luminaries and juggernauts of the industry. Make sure you check out his book on Amazon, A Startup Field Guide in the Age of Robots and AI, which is linked in the show notes. Or you can go to codestory.co/fieldguide. And thanks again for listening.